I never thought I would be the kind of woman to make a scene at a black tie event. But when my son's Emil insulted me, I revealed her secret at the party. And the silence that fell over that ballroom was heavy enough to crush bones. You see, there is a distinct difference between being polite and being a doormat. And Cynthia Vanderwall learned that day that she had mistaken my kindness for weakness. She thought her diamonds, her pedigree, and her passive-aggressive sneers could make me shrink into the floorboards, but she forgot one crucial thing. A mother protecting her child's happiness is the most dangerous creature on God's green earth. By the time I was done with her, she didn't just lose face. She lost the very pedestal she looked down on me from. Now, before I pour this piping hot tea and tell you exactly how I brought a high society matriarch to her knees, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like this video, baby. If you've ever had to smile in the face of disrespect just to keep the peace, you are in the right place. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, and let's get into the mess. My name is Regina, and for 28 years, my world has revolved around one singular son, my son Marcus. I raised him on my own in a one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, working double shifts at a bakery until my hands were swollen and my feet throbbed in a rhythm I eventually learned to ignore. I didn't just survive, I built. I went from kneading dough for minimum wage to owning Regina's Table, one of the most successful catering companies in the city. I put Marcus through private school, then college, and finally architecture school, not by asking for handouts, but by sweating through every single apron I owned. He grew up to be everything I prayed for: kind, brilliant, successful, and humble. He never forgot where he came from, even when his designs started winning awards and his bank account started looking a lot different than mine did at his age. So, when he came to me on a Sunday afternoon, a nervous sweat breaking out on his forehead, I knew something big was coming. We were sitting in my kitchen, the air smelling of vanilla and caramelized sugar from a batch of peach cobblers I had in the oven. Marcus was fidgeting with his coffee mug, a habit he's had since he was 6 years old whenever he broke a vase or got a bad grade. "Mama," he started, his voice cracking slightly, "I'm going to ask Emily to marry me." I felt a smile bloom across my face so wide it actually hurt. "Oh, baby, that is wonderful news. Emily is a doll. I knew she was the one the moment she helped me load the van at the community picnic without worrying about her manicure." And it was true. Emily was sweet. She was quiet, perhaps a little too timid for my taste, but she looked at my son like he hung the moon and stars. She was an elementary school teacher with a gentle spirit, and while she came from a world very different from ours, she never made us feel less than. But Marcus hesitated, the joy not quite reaching his eyes. There's the matter of her parents, specifically her mother. "We're having dinner at their estate this Friday. She wants to meet you properly before the engagement is official." The way he said properly made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We had met Emily's parents briefly at Marcus's graduation a few years back, but it was a passing handshake. I remembered a woman who looked like she smelled something foul, and a man who looked like he was afraid to speak without permission. "Cynthia and Richard Vanderwall," Marcus said, the names feeling heavy in the air. "Mama, they're intense. Old money. Emily is terrified of her mother. I just need you to promise me you'll be patient. Cynthia can be a lot." I reached across the granite countertop, granite I paid for in cash, and squeezed his hand. "Marcus, I have dealt with bridezillas, health inspectors, and vendors who tried to swindle me. I can handle a bougie mother-in-law. Don't you worry about a thing. I will be on my best behavior." If only I knew then that best behavior would be tested by fire. Friday arrived, and I dressed with intention. I chose a deep emerald dress that hugged my curves in a way that was tasteful but unapologetic, paired with gold jewelry that I had bought myself to celebrate my business's 10th anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had built an empire from flour and grit. I saw worth. I prayed that Cynthia Vanderwall would see the same. Marcus drove us to their home in Lake Forest. The drive took us away from the vibrant, beating heart of the city, past the suburbs I knew, and into a neighborhood where the driveways were longer than most city blocks. The houses weren't houses, they were estates. Stone lions guarded iron gates, and the landscaping looked manicured with nail scissors. When we pulled up to the Vanderwall residence, It looked like a museum that closed at 5 p.m. It was cold, imposing, and reeked of generational wealth, the kind that usually comes with a heavy dose of judgment. Emily met us at the door. She looked beautiful but pale, her hands trembling slightly as she hugged Marcus. "Mom is in the drawing room," she whispered, as if warning us about a sleeping dragon. "Please, just ignore her comments. She's in a mood." We walked through a hallway lined with portraits of ancestors who all looked like they died without ever smiling. The floors were marble, my heels clicking loudly in the cavernous silence. We entered the drawing room, and there she was. Cynthia Vanderwall sat on a velvet chaise lounge, holding a glass of white wine like it was a scepter. She was a striking woman, I'll give her that. Blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection, skin pulled tight, and wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my first delivery van. Her husband, Richard, stood by the fireplace, nursing a scotch and looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Marcus," Cynthia said, not standing up. Her voice was like crushed ice. "And, Regina, is it?" "It is," I said, stepping forward with a warm smile and extending my hand. "It's lovely to see you again, Cynthia. Thank you for having us in your beautiful home." She looked at my hand for a solid 3 seconds before giving it a limp, cold shake. "Yes. Well, Emily tells us you're in food service?" "The first jab." Subtle but sharp. "I own a catering company," I corrected gently, taking a seat on the adjacent sofa without waiting to be asked. "Regina's Table. We handle corporate events, weddings, and private galas throughout Chicago." "How quaint," Cynthia sniffed, taking a sip of her wine. "I suppose someone has to cook the food. We usually hire French caterers for our events. They just have a better understanding of the nuances of the palate. But good for you. It's important to have a trade." I felt Marcus stiffen beside me. I placed a calming hand on his knee. "Cooking is an art, Cynthia, not just a trade. But yes, I'm very proud of what I've built." Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The dining room was dimly lit, the table set with enough silverware to perform a surgery. We were served by a silent staff who moved like ghosts. Cynthia dominated the conversation, or rather, the interrogation. "So, Marcus," she said, cutting into her filet mignon, "Emily tells me you're an architect. Which firm?" "I'm a senior partner at Davis & Strong," Marcus replied proudly. "Davis & Strong," she mused, wrinkling her nose. "Are they the ones who do those urban housing projects? How noble. Richard's firm handles mostly international skylines. Dubai, London, that sort of thing. But I suppose affordable housing is necessary for those people." "Those people are families, Mother," Emily said, her voice shaking but brave. "Marcus designs incredible sustainable living spaces." Cynthia waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure he does, darling. I'm just saying it's a different world, just like Regina's world is different from ours." She turned her gaze on me, her eyes glittering with malice. "Tell me, Regina, was it difficult raising a child alone? I assume the father wasn't in the picture? Statistics being what they are." The room went dead silent. The air was sucked out of the space. That wasn't a microaggression. That was a declaration of war. She was referencing stereotypes, trying to reduce my life and my struggles to a statistic she read in a magazine she probably picked up at her country club. Marcus started to stand up, his fists clenched on the tablecloth. "Excuse me, Mrs. Vanderwall, but..." I squeezed his wrist hard, forcing him to stay seated. I looked Cynthia dead in the eye, my expression calm, though a fire was raging in my chest. "Marcus's father died serving this country when Marcus was 2 years old," I said, my voice steady and low. "And raising him alone wasn't difficult, Cynthia. It was a privilege. It taught us both the value of loyalty, hard work, and integrity. Things that, I've noticed, money simply cannot buy." Richard choked on his wine. Emily looked like she was about to pass out. Cynthia's eyes narrowed into slits. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of something behind her mask. Not shame, but anger. Pure, unadulterated anger that I had dared to speak back. "How patriotic," she finally murmured, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. "Shall we move to the patio for dessert? I find the air in here has become quite stifling." The rest of the evening was a blur of backhanded compliments. She criticized Emily's hair, implied Marcus was marrying up, and treated me like an interesting anthropological experiment. By the time we got back to the car, I was exhausted. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Marcus said, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. She was awful, worse than usual. If you want me to call off the dinner with them next week, I will. No, I said, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. You love Emily. I can see it. We are not going to let that woman destroy your happiness. She wants a reaction, Marcus. She wants me to get loud and ghetto so she can justify looking down on us. I won't give her the satisfaction. But the insults didn't stop there. Over the next few months of engagement planning, Cynthia became a nightmare. She tried to veto the venue Marcus and Emily chose because it lacked pedigree. She tried to force Emily to wear a Vanderwaal family heirloom dress that looked like a lace curtains catastrophe. And every time I offered to help or contribute, she shut me down. Oh, Regina, don't worry about the costs, she would say on speakerphone while we were looking at flowers. I know your budget is limited. Richard and I will handle the real expenses. You can just bring the napkins or something. I bit my tongue so many times I tasted blood. I did it for Marcus. I did it for Emily, who was slowly withering under her mother's thumb. But everyone has a breaking point. Mine came 2 weeks before the engagement party. It was supposed to be a introduction of the families gala. Cynthia insisted on hosting it at the estate, naturally. She claimed it was to celebrate the couple, but I knew it was a show of force. She wanted to parade Marcus around like a prize pony she had generously decided to adopt into her stable, while keeping me on the sidelines. I went over to the Vanderwaal estate early that Tuesday to drop off some samples for the dessert table. Emily had specifically asked for my signature red velvet cupcakes, despite her mother's protests that they were too heavy. I parked my van around the back, near the kitchen entrance, as instructed by the staff. I was carrying 2 large boxes of cupcakes when I heard voices drifting from the open French doors of the sunroom just above the patio. I don't understand why we have to invite her entire extended family, Cynthia. It's going to look like a circus. It was Richard's voice, sounding tired. We aren't inviting them, Richard. We are tolerating them. Cynthia's voice was sharp, clear, and dripping with venom. We have to play nice until the wedding. Once Emily is married and under our influence again, we can slowly phase the mother out. She's a bad influence. Did you see that dress she wore? She looks like she belongs on a street corner, not in our home. And that boy, Marcus, he's smart, I'll give him that, but he has that aggression in him. It's genetic. We need to get Emily away from that clan before she's ruined. I froze. The boxes in my hands felt like lead. It wasn't just snobbery, it was hatred. She was planning to cut me out of my son's life. She was planning to poison Emily against us. She saw my son's strength as aggression. She saw my style as street. I wanted to storm up there. I wanted to throw the cupcakes through the window and scream. But then, I heard something else. Besides, Cynthia continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we need this wedding to happen quickly. If the investors find out about the liquidity issue before the merger, we are finished. We need the positive press of a modern, inclusive union to distract from the audit. Marcus is the perfect token, a self-made Black man marrying into the Vanderwaal dynasty. The board will eat it up. It will buy us 6 months, maybe a year, to hide the accounts. My heart stopped beating. Liquidity issue? Audit? Token? She wasn't just a bigot, she was a fraud. She was using my son as a shield to cover up her own financial mess. They were broke, or close to it, and they were using my son's reputation, his clean, hardworking American dream reputation, to polish their tarnished silver. I stepped back into the shadows of the trellis, my breathing shallow. A cold calm washed over me, replacing the fiery anger. I didn't drop off the cupcakes. I turned around, walked back to my van, and set the boxes down on the passenger seat. I sat there for a long time, staring at the mansion that suddenly looked less like a fortress and more like a house of cards. You want a show, Cynthia? I whispered to the empty car. You want to talk about street corners and bad influences? All right. I started the engine. I wasn't going to argue with her. I wasn't going to fight her for wedding centerpiece choices. I was going to find the truth. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. My cousin Davina. She wasn't a caterer. She was a forensic accountant who worked for the IRS before going private. Regina? Davina answered, sounding surprised. Everything okay? No, Dee, I said, putting the van in gear. I need you to dig. I need you to find out everything you can about the Vanderwall family finances, and I need it before the engagement party next Saturday." "The Vanderwalls?" Davina whistled. "That's a big fish, Gina. What are you looking for?" "I'm looking for the rot," I said, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'm looking for the cracks in the foundation because I'm about to bring the whole house down." The next 10 days were a blur of research. While Cynthia was busy terrorizing florists and making Emily cry over seating arrangements, I was meeting Davina in diners at midnight, looking over spreadsheets that made no sense for a family with generational wealth. It turned out the Vanderwalls were leveraged to the hilt, mortgages on mortgages, shell companies moving money in circles to look like profit. And the charity foundation Cynthia ran, the one she bragged about constantly, it was bleeding money into offshore accounts that looked suspiciously like personal slush funds. But the smoking gun, the thing that would truly end her, wasn't just the money. It was where the money came from. Davina slid a folder across the table 2 days before the party. "You're not going to believe this, Gina. You know that old money she talks about? The grandfather's shipping empire? Yeah? It didn't exist. Her father was a con artist who changed his name in the 70s. He ran a Ponzi scheme in Florida before moving here. The entire Vanderwall identity is a fabrication. And Cynthia? She's been blackmailing her own board members to keep it quiet." I opened the folder. Photos, documents, bank statements. It was all there. The lies, the theft, the hypocrisy. She called me ghetto while she was running a criminal enterprise in Chanel suits. I closed the folder and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Thanks, Dee," I said. "I have a party to get ready for." The day of the engagement party arrived. The Vanderwall estate was decked out in white roses and crystal. A string quartet played softly on the lawn. Waiters circulated with champagne. The elite of Chicago were there, judges, politicians, business tycoons. I arrived late, intentionally. I wore a dress of pure scarlet red, not dark, modest red. Fire engine, stop sign, blood in the water red. It was a gown I had designed specifically for this moment. It demanded attention. When I walked onto the patio, heads turned. The murmur of conversation died down. Cynthia was standing near the microphone, holding a glass of champagne, looking like the Queen of England. When she saw me, her jaw tightened. She had tried to bury me. She had tried to shame me. She had planned to use my son and then discard me like trash. I walked straight toward her, the folder tucked discreetly under my arm like a clutch purse. "Regina," Cynthia said as I approached, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "You're late, and, my goodness, that dress, it's certainly loud." "It's festive, Cynthia," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "A celebration requires color, don't you think?" "I suppose," she sneered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Try not to embarrass your son tonight. Stay near the back. The help can get you a drink." I laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh that made people look over. "Oh, Cynthia," I said, stepping up onto the small riser where the microphone stood. "I'm not here for the drinks. I'm here for the toast." I reached for the microphone. Cynthia's eyes widened. She tried to block me, but I was faster. I tapped the mic twice. Thump, thump. "Good evening, everyone." I beamed at the crowd. The string quartet stopped playing. Marcus looked at me, confused. Emily looked terrified. "For those who don't know me, I'm Regina Marcus's mother," I continued, "and I just wanted to say a few words about this beautiful union, and about the incredible family my son is marrying into." Cynthia relaxed slightly, thinking I was capitulating. She took a sip of her champagne, a smug look on her face. "You see," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "Cynthia has taught me so much about heritage, about the importance of knowing where you come from, about the difference between those of us who work for a living and those who steal for a living." The glass slipped from Cynthia's hand. It shattered on the stone patio with a sound like a gunshot. "Excuse me?" she hissed, stepping forward. "What did you say?" I opened the folder. "I think it's time we talked about the Florida account, Cynthia," I said into the microphone, my voice ice cold. "And the fact that the Vanderwall legacy is actually just a man named Earl who ran off with a pension fund in 1974. The silence was absolute. You could hear the wind rustling the leaves. I held up the first document. "Who wants to hear a story?" I asked the crowd. And that, my friends, is when the party really started. The sound of Cynthia's champagne glass hitting the stone patio wasn't a tinker. It was an explosion. It was the sharp, violent punctuation mark to the sentence I had just delivered, and for a heartbeat, that shard of sound was the only thing in the universe. The liquid splattered across her cream pantsuit like a gunshot wound, a jagged stain spreading rapidly across the expensive fabric. But she didn't look down. Her eyes were fixed on me, wide, frantic, and filled with a terror so raw, it almost made me pity her. Almost. I stood there on the riser, the microphone still cool in my hand, looking out at a sea of Chicago's elite. These were people who prided themselves on their composure, on their ability to weather scandals with a stiff upper lip, but even they were frozen. A judge I recognized from the morning news had his mouth slightly open, a canapé hovering halfway to his lips. A woman in a sequined gown was clutching her pearls so hard, I thought the string might snap. They weren't looking at Cynthia, the hostess. They were looking at me, the caterer, the help, the woman in the red dress who had just pulled the pin on a grenade. "Turn it off!" Cynthia shrieked, her voice cracking, stripping away the polished veneer of the society matron and revealing the desperate con artist underneath. She lunged toward the audio technician, a young kid who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the shrubbery. "Cut the sound! Security! Get this lunatic off my property!" The screech of feedback whined through the speakers as the technician scrambled to kill the mic, but it didn't matter. I didn't need amplification anymore. The silence was so profound that a whisper would have carried to the back of the garden. "You can cut the mic, Cynthia," I said, my voice projecting with the diaphragm strength I'd developed yelling orders in noisy kitchens for 3 decades. "But you can't cut the paper trail." I reached into the folder and pulled out a photocopy of a bank transfer. I held it up, the paper trembling slightly in the evening breeze. "This is a transfer from the Vanderwall Heritage Foundation," I announced, stepping down from the riser and walking slowly toward the guests. I wasn't aggressive. I was methodical. I moved like a teacher handing out graded exams. "It's dated 3 months ago, $50,000. It was supposed to go to the Children's Arts Initiative. Instead, it went to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, registered to a CV Holdings. Care to guess what those initials stand for?" Richard, who had been standing by the fireplace looking like a wax statue, suddenly came to life. He rushed toward me, his face a mask of panic. "Regina, please. This is neither the time nor the place. We can discuss this in private. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I turned on him, my heels clicking sharply on the stone. "Richard, you tried to use my son as a human shield. You wanted to marry him into this family, so when the IRS comes knocking next month, and they are coming, you could point to his clean record and his minority-owned business status as a distraction. You wanted a token. You wanted a scapegoat." I looked over at Marcus. He was standing next to Emily, his arm still around her waist. His face was a mixture of shock and dawning horror. He looked from me to Richard, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place behind his eyes. The urgent wedding date, the pressure, the sudden interest in his background. "Is that true?" Marcus asked. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. He let go of Emily, stepping away from her as if he'd been burned. "Richard, is that true?" "Of course not," Cynthia yelled, finally finding her footing. She stormed between us, her face flushed a blotchy red. "She's lying, Marcus. She's a jealous, bitter woman who can't stand to see her son succeed. She fabricated all of this. Look at her. Look at that dress. She's classless trash trying to ruin your big night." She pointed a manicured finger at my chest, shaking with rage. "Security! I want her arrested for trespassing and slander. Get her out of here." 2 burly men in black suits started moving toward me from the perimeter of the party. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I held the folder tighter. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice calm. "I have no desire to stay in a house built on fraud. But before I go, ask yourself one thing, Cynthia. If I'm lying, why is your husband crying?" All eyes snapped to Richard. He had collapsed into a garden chair, his head in his hands, sobbing quietly. It was the sound of a man who had been running a race for 40 years and had finally hit the wall. The undeniable guilt radiating off him was more damning than any document I held. Emily let out a sound, a high, keening whimper that broke my heart. She looked at her father, then at her mother, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Daddy," she whispered, "what did you do?" "Don't speak to him," Cynthia snapped at her daughter, Stava, grabbing Emily's arm hard enough to leave marks. Pull yourself together, Emily. Don't let these people see you weak. This woman is trying to destroy us. I stepped forward, my protective instinct flaring up. Let go of her. You get off my property, Cynthia screamed, spitting the words. The security guards were close now, reaching for my arms. I held up a hand. Don't touch me. I know the way out. I turned to Marcus. Baby, I'm going to the car. You do what you need to do, but know that I love you too much to let you walk into a trap. I turned my back on the chaos, the weeping husband, the screaming wife, the shattered glass, and walked away. I felt the heat of 300 pairs of eyes on my back. I kept my head high, my shoulders back. I walked past the silent string quartet, past the buffet table filled with food that suddenly looked unappetizing, and out through the iron gates. When I got to my van, my hands finally started to shake. The adrenaline that had sustained me crashed, leaving me leaning against the steering wheel, gasping for air. I had done it. I had dropped the bomb. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like nausea. I hated that it had come to this. I hated that I had to break my son's heart to save his life. 10 minutes later, the passenger door opened. Marcus slid in. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He didn't say a word. He just stared out the windshield. A moment later, the back door slid open. Emily climbed in. She was shivering, her expensive engagement dress looking out of place on the worn upholstery of my delivery van. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivers. Drive, Mama, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Just drive. I started the engine and pulled away from the Vanderwall estate, leaving the sirens that were just starting to wail in the distance behind us. We drove in silence for 40 minutes, the city lights blurring past us. I took them to my house, my sanctuary. It wasn't a mansion, but it was paid for, and it was honest. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon and sage. I sat them down at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had done his homework, where we had paid bills, where we had laughed and cried. I didn't ask if they were hungry. I just put the kettle on. Tea. Sweet, strong tea. It was the only medicine I knew for shock. I placed the folder on the table between us. I'm sorry, I said softly, looking at Emily. She was wrapped in an afghan I had crocheted, staring into a mug of Earl Grey as if it held the answers to the universe. I know how much this hurts, child. I truly do, but I couldn't let you marry into a crime scene. Emily sniffled, wiping her nose with a paper towel. Is it really all fake? Grandfather's money? The investments? The money ran out years ago, I explained gently, tapping the folder. Your parents have been robbing Peter to pay Paul since you were in high school. But the Ponzi scheme? That's new. Your father started investing, friends, money into non-existent real estate deals to cover the debts. They were using the foundation to launder the cash, and they were terrified the audit was coming. Marcus slammed his fist onto the table, making the mugs jump. And where do I fit in? Why me? Because you're clean, Marcus, I said, reaching out to cover his fist with my hand. You're a golden boy, respected, up and coming, and you're black. Cynthia knew that if the board started asking questions, she could accuse them of racism for targeting a company newly merged with a minority-owned firm. She was going to use you as a political shield. If the ship went down, she was going to make sure you were the one holding the wheel. Marcus closed his eyes, a vein throbbing in his temple. She called me a token? She called you an insurance policy, I corrected. I can't believe it, Emily whispered, fresh tears spilling over. I mean, I knew Mom was controlling. I knew she was obsessed with image. But criminal? I can't go back there. I can't look at her. You don't have to, I said firmly. You stay here tonight, both of you. The phone in Marcus's pocket buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again, a relentless, angry vibration against the wooden table. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. His expression darkened. It's her, he said. Don't answer it, Emily pleaded, shrinking into the blanket. Put it on speaker, I said. We need to know what her next move is. A rat is most dangerous when it's cornered. Marcus hesitated, then swiped the screen and set the phone down. Marcus! Cynthia's voice filled the kitchen, shrill and distorted. Where the hell are you? You bring my daughter back this instant. That woman, that criminal mother of yours, has kidnapped you. We're not kidnapped, Cynthia, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. We're safe, and we're done. Done? Cynthia laughed, a manic, jagged sound. You don't get to be done. You ungrateful little upstart. Do you have any idea what you've caused? The police are at the gate. The press is calling. You think you can just walk away? You broke the law, Mother, Emily spoke up, her voice trembling but audible. Regina showed us the papers. You stole money from the charity. There was a pause on the other end, a cold, heavy silence. You listen to me, Emily, Cynthia hissed, her tone shifting from hysterical to menacing. You are a Vanderwall. You are complicit. Your name is on the board of directors for that charity. Remember? You signed those papers last Christmas. If I go down, you go down with me. You'll go to prison, darling. Unless my blood ran cold. She had set her own daughter up. Unless what? Marcus demanded. Unless you issue a statement, Cynthia said, her voice smooth now, calculating. You will tell the press that Regina is mentally unstable, that she has a history of delusions, that the documents she forged are fake. You will stand by your family, Emily. Or, I swear to God, I will testify that you were the mastermind behind the transfers. Who do you think a jury will believe? The confused old mother, or the young, ambitious daughter who wanted to fund her fiancé's lifestyle? The cruelty was breathtaking. She was willing to throw her own child into the fire to save her skin. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You wouldn't. Try me, Cynthia whispered. You have until morning to decide. Come home, Emily. Or prepare for a mugshot. The line went dead. The silence in my kitchen was heavier than the silence at the party. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. Marcus looked at me, fear finally breaking through his anger. Mama? Can she do that? Is Emily really liable? I grabbed the folder and flipped through it frantically, looking for the board meeting minutes. There, on the last page, was Emily's signature. A signature obtained over Christmas eggnog, likely with a dismissive, "Just sign here, darling, it's for the tax write-offs." She's got her, I whispered, feeling a cold pit form in my stomach. She framed her own daughter as the fall guy. Emily put her head on the table and began to sob, a sound of utter defeat. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. The fight wasn't over. It had just mutated into something far uglier. I had exposed the secret, but I hadn't anticipated that Cynthia had a dead man's switch. Stop crying, I said, turning back to them. My voice was hard, not with anger, but with resolve. Emily, lift your head up. She looked at me, eyes red and swollen. We are not going to let her win, I said. She thinks she has leverage? She thinks she can hold you hostage with a signature? But she's right, Emily choked out. I signed it. I didn't read it, but I signed it. Then we need to prove you were coerced, I said. We need to prove that she has been manipulating the books long before you were on that board. We need to go deeper. How? Marcus asked. We showed everything we had. No, I said, a dangerous idea forming in my mind. We showed what Davina found in the public records and the leaked bank statements, but to prove intent, to prove she set you up, we need the private records. We need the black book. What black book? Every con artist has one, I said, remembering something my father told me about the numbers runners back in the day. A ledger where they keep the real truth so they don't get confused by their own lies. Cynthia is too arrogant to destroy it. She keeps it close. I guarantee it. And where would it be? Emily asked. I saw a safe, I recalled, closing my eyes and visualizing the drawing room from that first awful dinner. Behind the portrait of her grandfather in the study. She glanced at it when Richard mentioned the liquidity issues. You want us to break in? Marcus looked at me like I had grown a second head. No, I said, checking my watch. It was 2 a.m. The police are probably swarming the place right now, or they will be soon. But if they find that book, it goes into evidence, and it might take months to clear Emily's name. Cynthia will spin the narrative before then. I walked over to the hook by the door and grabbed my keys. We aren't going to break in, I said. We're going to use the one thing Cynthia loves more than money. What's that? Her reputation, I said. Marcus, get your laptop. We're going to live stream. Live stream? If she wants a media war, I said, a fierce grin spreading across my face, let's give her one. But we're not doing it from here. We're going back. Back to the house? Emily squeaked. No, I said. We're going to the one place she can't kick us out of. The place where she hides her dirtiest secrets. Where? The Foundation's office, I said. It's in a shared commercial building downtown. My cousin Davina has a key card because her firm audits the building's management. We're going to break into her office, find the digital backups, and we're going to broadcast the truth to the world before the sun comes up. I opened the door to the night. Are you with me? Marcus stood up, the fire returning to his eyes. He reached down and took Emily's hand, pulling her to her feet. We're with you, Mama, he said. Good, I said. Let's go catch a thief. The city of Chicago changes when the clock strikes 3 in the morning. The tourists are gone, the jazz clubs have shuttered, and the streets belong to the street sweepers, the insomniacs, and people like us, people running for their lives. I drove the van with a focus I hadn't felt since the early days of my business, when a wedding cake collapsed an hour before the reception, and I had to rebuild it from scratch while the bride was getting her makeup done. This was different, though. I wasn't fixing a cake. I was trying to stop my family from being devoured by a wolf in designer clothing. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, rhythmic shadows across Marcus's face as he typed furiously on his laptop in the passenger seat. Davina says the security rotation changes at 3:15, Marcus said, his voice tight. We have an 8-minute window where the front desk guard does a perimeter check of the parking garage. That's our way in. And the key card? I asked, swerving around a pothole that could have swallowed a compact car. She left it taped under the rim of the trash can in the alleyway behind the building, Marcus replied, reading the text message. Mama, are you sure about this? Breaking into a corporate office isn't the same as crashing a party. We aren't breaking in, I said, though I knew it was a technicality. We are retrieving evidence to prevent a felony. And besides, Cynthia declared war. You don't win a war by staying in the trenches. You win by taking the enemy's command center. Emily was silent in the back. She hadn't said a word since we left my kitchen. She was curled into a ball, staring at the floor of the van. The revelation that her mother had planned to frame her wasn't just a betrayal. It was an amputation. It had severed the last tether of trust she had to her past. I needed her to wake up and fast, because a traumatized liability was going to get us caught. We pulled up to the service alley of the towering glass monolith where the Vanderwall Heritage Foundation leased the penthouse suite. The building looked like a shard of black ice piercing the night sky. It was cold, sterile, and imposing. I killed the engine and the lights. Emily, I said, turning in my seat, I need you to listen to me. She looked up, her eyes dull. I know your heart is broken, I said, my voice low and fierce. And you have every right to mourn the mother you thought you had. But right now, the woman who is your mother is trying to put you in a cage. I need you to be angry, baby. Sadness makes you slow. Anger makes you move. Can you be angry for me? She blinked, and for a second, I saw a spark, a tiny smoldering ember in the ash. She used my signature. Emily whispered. She made me sign my life away while we were drinking cocoa. Yes, I said. Now let's go get it back. We moved quickly. Marcus found the key card exactly where Davina promised. We slipped through the service door just as the heavy boots of the security guard echoed on the concrete ramp of the garage nearby. We held our breath, pressing ourselves into the shadows of the loading dock until the footsteps faded. The service elevator was waiting. We stepped in, and Marcus swiped the card. The light turned green. Penthouse. The ride up took an eternity. The numbers on the display ticked upward, 10, 20, 30, marking our ascent into the belly of the beast. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that I prayed the others couldn't hear. I smoothed down my dress. I was still wearing the scarlet gown from the party, now wrinkled and stained with a bit of grease from the van, but I wore it like armor. The doors slid open with a soft ding that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The foundation's lobby was disgusting in its opulence. While Cynthia claimed the charity was struggling, the office told a different story. Marble floors, original abstract art on the walls, and a reception desk made of what looked like reclaimed driftwood that probably cost more than my first house. It was silent, bathed in the blue glow of emergency exit signs. Where is it? I whispered. Executive suite is in the back, Emily said, her voice shaky but clear. Corner office, the one with the view of the lake. We moved through the bullpen of cubicles, past rows of silent computers where unknowing employees probably processed legitimate donations, never realizing they were fueling a furnace of fraud. We reached the heavy double doors of Cynthia's office. Locked. "Stand back," Marcus said, preparing to kick it. "Stop," Emily said, stepping forward. She reached up to the keypad. "Her birthday. It's always her birthday." She punched in 4 numbers. The lock clicked. Green light. We pushed inside. The office smelled like Cynthia, expensive perfume and ozone. It was pristine. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room, backed by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city we were fighting for. "Okay," Marcus said, rushing to the desktop computer. Davina said the backups would be on a local server, not the cloud. Cynthia is paranoid about hackers, which works in our favor. If it's local, it's here. He sat down and woke the computer. "Password prompt. Try Legacy," Emily said. Marcus typed it. "Incorrect password." "Try Vanderwall," I suggested. "Incorrect password." "Think, Emily," I urged. "What matters to her? What does she love?" Emily let out a bitter, dry laugh. "Herself. Try Cynthia." Marcus typed it. "Incorrect password." "Okay, we're locked out after 2 more tries," Marcus said, sweat beading on his forehead. "If we trip the lockout, it might alert security." I looked around the room. It was too clean, too curated. There were no personal photos, no knickknacks, just awards and plaques. I walked over to the bookshelf. "Regina, what are you doing?" Marcus hissed. "We need the password." "A woman like Cynthia doesn't trust computers," I muttered, running my hand along the spines of the leather-bound books. "She's old school. She likes things she can hold, things she can burn if she needs to." I remembered the safe behind the painting at the house. There wouldn't be a safe here. It was too obvious. But there was something else. On the bottom shelf, tucked between a copy of The Art of War and a charity gala photo album, was a thick black binder. It didn't have a title on the spine. I pulled it out. It was heavy. I opened it on the desk. "Bingo," I whispered. It wasn't just a ledger. It was a diary of destruction, handwritten notes, bank routing numbers, and emails, printed out and annotated in Cynthia's sharp, spidery handwriting. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a page dated 3 years ago. "Projected scapegoat strategy. If audit occurs, shift liability to junior board member. EV is malleable. Trust is high. Will sign without reading. Recommend transfer of toxic assets to her name immediately." "EV?" Emily read, her voice trembling. "Emily Vanderwall." "She planned it," Marcus said, his voice full of horror. 3 years ago, we weren't even engaged then. "She was waiting for you to be useful," I said, flipping the page. "Or someone like you. She needed a distraction." I turned another page and froze. "Oh God," I breathed. "What?" Marcus leaned in. It was a list of names, not just donors, beneficiaries. But they weren't charities. They were people, judges, city council members, even a police commissioner. Next to each name was a dollar amount and a date. "She's not just stealing," I said, looking up at them. "She's bribing half the city. That's how she stayed afloat this long. That's why the investigations always go away. She's paying for protection." This was bigger than I thought. If we exposed this, we weren't just taking down a socialite, we were taking down a syndicate. We were poking a hornet's nest with a short stick. "We need to copy this," Marcus said, pulling out his phone to take pictures. "We need to get this to the FBI." "No," I said, my mind racing. "The FBI takes time, warrants, red tape. By the time they move, Cynthia will have shredded this room and fled the country. Or worse, one of the names on this list will make sure we disappear before we can testify." "So what do we do?" Emily asked, fear creeping back into her eyes. "We go live," I said. "We show the world right now. Once it's public, they can't bury it. They can't silence a million witnesses." Marcus nodded, setting up his laptop on the desk, angling the camera so the city skyline was visible behind us. "I can tether to my phone's hotspot. We'll be live in 2 minutes." I grabbed the binder. "Emily, you need to read this part, the part about you." "I can't," she said, backing away. "You have to," I said firmly. "The world needs to see the victim. They need to see the daughter she betrayed. It's the only way to clear your name." Suddenly, the room went dark. The hum of the building's air conditioning died. The computer monitor blacked out. The only light came from the city outside and the glow of Marcus's laptop screen. "Power cut?" Emily whispered. "No," Marcus said, checking his phone. "My signal is jammed. No service. No Wi-Fi." "They're here," I said, the hair on my arm standing up. "She knows." We heard it then, the heavy thud 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 of boots in the hallway. Not the slow pace of a night watchman, the fast, tactical rhythm of a team. Lock the door, I yelled. Marcus lunged for the door, throwing the deadbolt just as the handle turned violently from the outside. Bam! A heavy weight slammed against the wood. Open the door, private security. A voice boomed. It didn't sound like a friendly rent-a-cop. It sounded like a threat. We're trapped, Emily cried, backing against the window. We're on the 30th floor, Regina. There's nowhere to go. I looked at the heavy door. It would hold for a minute, maybe two. They had battering rams or drills. It was only a matter of time. Marcus, can we broadcast? I asked. No signal. They're jamming the frequency. Marcus shouted, frantically typing. I can't get a stream out. I looked around the room, desperate. My eyes landed on the desk phone. Dead. I looked at the window. Just a drop into darkness. Then I saw it. In the corner of the ceiling, blinking with a steady red light. A hardwired security camera. The internal network, I said, pointing. What? That camera, I said. It feeds to the security desk downstairs, but usually these systems have a remote access port for the owners to check in from home. It's hardwired. They can't jam a cable. I can hack the feed, Marcus said, eyes widening. If I can patch into the camera's IP, I can reverse the stream. Instead of sending video to the server, I can broadcast from the server out to the web. Do it, I ordered. Bam! Bam! The wood of the door frame began to splinter. I need time, Marcus yelled, his fingers flying across the keys. It's encrypted. How much time? 2 minutes. You don't have 2 minutes. I grabbed a heavy brass statue of an abstract dancer from the pedestal in the corner. I walked to the door. Regina, what are you doing? Emily screamed. Buying time, I said. Emily, grab the heavy chair. Wedge it under the handle. Marcus, don't look up, just type. The door shuttered again. A crack appeared near the lock. Through the gap, I saw a man in tactical gear. He wasn't police. He was wearing a balaclava. These were cleaners. They weren't here to arrest us. They were here to erase us. We are not dying in an office, do you hear me? I shouted at my son and his fiancée. I did not survive poverty, racism, and raising a child on minimum wage to get taken out by some hired goons in a suit. I slammed my shoulder against the door, adding my weight to the barricade. Type, Marcus. Type like your life depends on it. I'm in, Marcus yelled. I'm bypassing the firewall. I've got the feed. I'm rerouting to YouTube. It's going to be grainy. It's going to be black and white, but it's going out. Go, I screamed as the door hinges groaned. Marcus turned the laptop around so the webcam faced us, but he bridged it to the security camera feed. We're live. Now. I spun around, facing the security camera in the corner of the ceiling, clutching the black binder to my chest like a shield. My name is Regina King, I shouted at the camera lens, knowing that thousands of notifications were popping up on phones across Chicago right now. And I am being held hostage in the offices of the Vanderwall Foundation. The door gave way with a deafening crash. 3 men burst into the room. They were huge, dressed in black, carrying zip ties and batons. Drop it, the lead man roared, raising a baton. Don't you touch me, I bellowed, holding the binder up to the camera. I have the ledger. The world is watching you. We are live. Wave to the camera, boys. The lead man froze. He looked up at the blinking red light of the security camera, then at Marcus's laptop, which showed the viewer count skyrocketing. 500, 2,000, 5,000. Abort, the man whispered into his earpiece. We're exposed. Abort. You're not going anywhere, I said, stepping forward, the adrenaline making me feel 10 feet tall. The police are on their way, and I have a story to tell. I looked into the lens, taking a deep breath. You all saw the red dress, I said to the viewers, my voice steadying. You saw the champagne glass break. Now let me show you what broke it. I opened the binder. This is the Black Book of Cynthia Vanderwall. But just as I started to read the first name, the man in the back did something I didn't expect. He didn't attack me. He didn't run. He pulled a fire alarm. The ear-splitting shriek of the siren filled the room, drowning out my voice. The strobe lights began to flash, disorienting and blinding. They're flushing us out, Marcus yelled, covering his ears. The men in black took advantage of the chaos, turning and sprinting out the shattered door, disappearing into the stairwell. We have the evidence, I yelled over the siren. We have to go. The police will be here in minutes, but so will Cynthia's lawyers. Wait, Emily said. staring at the open binder on the desk. Regina, look at the last page. We don't have time. Look, she insisted. I looked down. The last entry wasn't a bribe. It wasn't a transfer. It was a note, scribbled in shaky handwriting just yesterday. If the house of cards falls, burn the basement. No one can know about the boy. I stared at the words. The what boy? Marcus asked. I looked at Emily. Her face had gone ghostly pale. I had a brother, she whispered. He died when he was a baby. Sudden infant death syndrome. That's what they told me. I looked at the note again. No one can know about the boy. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning swept through the room. He didn't die, I said, the horror of the realization settling in my bones. Cynthia doesn't have a soul, Emily. She didn't just hide money. She hid a child. The sirens wailed around us, but I couldn't hear them anymore. The financial fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. We had stumbled onto something far darker, something evil. We have to find him, I said. Burn the basement. She's going to destroy the evidence. And if the evidence is a person, we have to get to the estate, Marcus said, grabbing the laptop. Now. The police are coming here, I said. We leave the binder for them, but we go. We have a life to save. We ran for the stairs, leaving the empty office and the flashing lights behind us. The night was far from over. The party had been a revelation. The office had been a confirmation. But what was waiting for us in the basement of the Vanderwall estate was going to be a nightmare. The drive back to the Vanderwall estate was a blur of terrified speculation and the smell of burning rubber. I pushed my old delivery van to speeds it had never seen, the engine whining in protest as we tore down the highway. The city skyline, now receding in the rearview mirror, felt like a different world. We were leaving the realm of corporate crimes and white-collar theft and heading towards something primal, something that sat heavy and cold in the pit of my stomach. He was named Thomas, Emily whispered from the back seat. She was rocking back and forth, clutching the seatbelt strap like a lifeline. I was 5 when he was born. I remember he had big blue eyes. He was so quiet. And then one day, he was just gone. Mom said he went to sleep and didn't wake up. There was a funeral, a tiny closed casket. There was no body in that casket, I said, my grip on the steering wheel tightening until my knuckles ached. Just bricks or sand. She faked a death to hide a life. But why? Marcus asked, watching the GPS as we neared the exit. If he had special needs or if he was sick, why hide him? Why not just put him in a facility if she was that heartless? Because Cynthia deals in appearances, I said, the realization settling over me like ash. And she deals in money. If your grandfather's will left everything to the male heir, or if the trust fund was tied to Thomas, then she couldn't just send him away. She had to keep him alive to keep the checks coming, but dead to the world so she could spend them. We turned off the main road and onto the winding, tree-lined drive that led to the estate. The iron gates were open, a bad sign. Usually they were sealed tight to keep the riffraff out. Now they stood gaping like the jaws of a beast waiting to swallow us whole. The house loomed ahead, dark and silent against the night sky. There were no police lights yet, no sirens wailing in the driveway. We had beaten the authorities, but we might not have beaten Cynthia. Look, Marcus pointed. Parked haphazardly on the gravel near the side entrance was Cynthia's silver Mercedes. The driver's door was left wide open, the interior light casting a lonely yellow glow on the stones. She's here, I said, killing the headlights and coasting the van to a stop near the hedge maze. And she's in a hurry. We scrambled out of the van. The air was thick with humidity and the chirping of crickets, a deceptively peaceful soundtrack for what we were about to walk into. The basement, Emily said, her voice trembling but her legs moving. The entrance is through the wine cellar. There's a heavy oak door near the pantry. We ran to the back of the house. The French doors leading to the kitchen had been smashed inward. Shards of glass littered the patio. Cynthia hadn't bothered with keys. She had broken into her own house. We stepped over the glass and into the kitchen. It was eerie. The remnants of our dinner from weeks ago, the mental image of it at least, seemed to hang in the air. Now the house felt abandoned, stripped of its soul. "Do you smell that?" Marcus whispered. I sniffed the air. Beneath the scent of lemon polish and stale flowers, there was something sharp, chemical. "Gasoline," I hissed. Run. We sprinted through the hallway, past the portraits of the fake ancestors, and burst into the pantry. The heavy oak door to the cellar was standing ajar. The smell of gasoline was stronger here, stinging my eyes. We thundered down the wooden stairs, plunging into the cool dampness of the underground. The wine cellar was vast, lined with thousands of bottles of vintage wines that probably cost more than my entire catering business. But Cynthia wasn't interested in the wine. At the far end of the cellar, a large shelving unit had been swung open on hidden hinges. A secret passage. It was real, Emily gasped, her hand covering her mouth. The ghost in the walls. I used to hear humming when I played down here. She told me it was the furnace. We moved through the opening. The air temperature changed instantly. It wasn't damp and cool anymore. It was warm, controlled. We stepped into a corridor lined with acoustic foam, soundproofing. Serious, industrial-grade soundproofing designed to keep screams in. At the end of the hall was a steel door with a heavy keypad lock, but the door was unlocked, swinging slightly on its hinges. I pushed it open and stepped inside. I don't know what I expected. A dungeon? A cage? What we found was perhaps even more disturbing. It was a living room. A perfect, windowless replica of a 1950s suburban living room. There was a plush beige carpet, a television playing a loop of old cartoons with the volume low, and walls painted a soft, calming blue. Toys were scattered everywhere. Expensive, educational toys, but toys meant for a toddler, not an adult. And in the corner, huddled on a bed with a custom-made safety railing, was a man. He looked to be about 25 years old. He was thin, pale as parchment, with hair the color of straw that hung long over his eyes. He was rocking back and forth, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. He looked up as we entered. His eyes were the same striking blue as Emily's, but they were wide with terror. He made a low, keening sound in his throat, the sound of a wounded animal. "Thomas?" Emily whispered, stepping forward, tears streaming down her face. The man flinched, pulling his knees to his chest. He didn't speak. He didn't seem to understand words. "He's been down here for 20 years, Marcus said, his voice thick with revulsion. "My God, she kept him like a pet." "Not a pet," a voice said from behind us. "An asset." We spun around. Cynthia was standing in the doorway. She looked like a woman who had walked through hell and decided to stay. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared across her face in jagged streaks. In one hand, she held a red gasoline canister. In the other, she held a silver lighter. "Cynthia," I said, stepping in front of Marcus and Emily, my body instinctively forming a shield. "Put the lighter down. It's over. The police are on their way. The live stream went out. Everyone knows." "They know about the money," Cynthia said, her voice eerily calm, almost conversational. She splashed a line of gasoline across the threshold, sealing us in. "They know about the fraud, but they don't know about this. Not yet. And if there's no evidence, well, then it's just a tragic fire. A faulty wire in the wine cellar, so sad. The grieving mother lost everything." "You're insane," Emily screamed at her. "He's your son. Look at him. He's a human being." Cynthia looked at Thomas with a cold, detached sneer. "He is a mistake, a genetic error. Do you know what it's like, Emily? To marry into a lie to build a reputation from scratch and then give birth to that? He would have ruined everything. The pity, the whispers. Poor Cynthia with her broken boy. I couldn't allow it." "So you buried him alive?" I shouted, my anger vibrating in my chest. "I kept him comfortable," she snapped. "He has food. He has TV. He's happy. But the trust, Grandfather Vanderwall, or whatever name that old drunk used, left the core capital to the firstborn male heir. If Thomas died, the money went to charity. If Thomas lived, I controlled the trust as his guardian. It was a simple business decision." "He's not a business decision," Marcus yelled. "He's your flesh and blood." "He is a liability," Cynthia screamed, her composure cracking. "And now, so are you." She tipped the can, dousing the carpet in front of her. The fumes were overpowering now. I could taste the petrol in the back of my throat. "You're going to burn us all?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, trying to keep her talking. "You think you're going to walk out of here? You're covered in gas, Cynthia. You strike that lighter, you go up too." "I have an exit," she smiled, a jagged, broken thing. "And besides, I'd rather burn than rot in a cell with common criminals." She raised the lighter. Her thumb hovered over the wheel. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the heavy brass lamp on the bedside table next to Thomas. It was 6 feet away, too far. Emily, I whispered, not moving my lips, the fire extinguisher. There was one mounted on the wall near the TV, a mandatory safety regulation for the room, no doubt. Irony at its finest. Say goodbye to the help, Emily, Cynthia said, her eyes gleaming. It's time to clean house. She flicked the lighter. Click. The spark jumped. In that split second, time seemed to stretch. The flame caught the vapors rising from the carpet. It didn't start as a small fire. It whooshed into a wall of orange and blue heat, an instant inferno separating us from the door and from Cynthia. No, Marcus screamed, shielding his face from the heat. Cynthia stepped back into the corridor, laughing as the flames licked up the soundproofing foam on the walls. The toxic black smoke began to roll across the ceiling instantly. Goodbye, Regina, she screamed through the wall of fire. You wanted a roast? You got one. She slammed the heavy steel door shut. We heard the heavy clank of the external lock engaging. We were trapped, buried underground, in a soundproof box, with a fire that was eating the oxygen by the second. Get the extinguisher, I roared, grabbing the blanket from Thomas's bed and soaking it in the fish tank that sat on the dresser. I didn't care about the fish. I cared about the water. Marcus grabbed the red canister from the wall and pulled the pin. Whoosh! A cloud of white chemical powder blasted into the flames at the door, knocking them back for a second, but the heat was too intense. The gasoline had soaked into the carpet padding. The fire was spreading sideways, crawling up the walls. It's not enough, Marcus yelled, coughing as the smoke thickened. The door! We have to get the door open. I threw the wet blanket over my head and charged the door. The handle was scorching hot. I kicked it, slammed my shoulder into it. It didn't budge. It was solid steel, designed to keep a secret in, not to let people out. Help me! I yelled. Marcus joined me, throwing his weight against the steel. We battered it until our shoulders bruised, but it was useless. Behind us, Thomas began to scream. It was a high, piercing sound that cut through the roar of the fire. He was off the bed, curled in the corner, rocking violently. Thomas! Emily crawled over to him, keeping low under the smoke. Thomas, look at me. It's Emily. It's Em. She grabbed his hand. He looked at her, confusion and terror warring in his eyes. Then he pointed. He wasn't pointing at the fire. He was pointing at the wall behind the TV. Bad, he moaned. Bad place. What is he saying? I choked, the smoke searing my lungs. Bad place, Thomas repeated, pointing frantically. The TV, Marcus shouted. Look at the wall behind it. I squinted through the haze. The wall behind the television unit looked slightly different. The paneling didn't line up perfectly. Is that a vent? I asked. No, Marcus said, rushing over and tearing the flat-screen TV off its mount, smashing it to the floor. It's a service access. For the wiring. He ripped at the paneling. It came away with a snap. Behind it was a crawlspace, a narrow, unfinished tunnel filled with cables and ducts. It's the maintenance chase for the HVAC system, Marcus yelled. It has to lead to the mechanical room. The fire was roaring now, consuming the bed, the carpet, the toys. The heat was blistering. We had maybe 60 seconds before we passed out from smoke inhalation. Go! I grabbed Emily and shoved her toward the hole. Take Thomas! Go! He won't move, Emily cried, tugging on her brother's arm. He's too scared. I turned to the terrified young man. I didn't have time for gentle therapy. I grabbed him by the front of his pajamas, getting right in his face. Listen to me, boy, I bellowed, channeling every ounce of maternal command I possessed. You have been in a box your whole life. You want to die in this box? Or do you want to see the sky? Move your ass. Something in my tone, maybe the sheer volume, maybe the authority, snapped him out of his trance. He scrambled into the hole after Emily. Marcus, go, I ordered. Not without you. I'm right behind you. Move. Marcus dove into the crawlspace. I took one last look at the room, the gilded cage that was turning into a crematorium. The flames were licking the ceiling now. The soundproofing foam was melting, dripping like burning rain. I squeezed into the tunnel. It was tight, dusty, and hot. I crawled on my elbows, dragging my body over sharp bundles of wire. Ahead of me, I could hear Marcus coughing and urging Thomas forward. Keep going, don't stop. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. My lungs were burning. My eyes were streaming tears. I could feel the heat chasing us, the fire sucking the air out of the tunnel from behind. Then, a draft. Cool air. I see light, Emily's voice echoed. We scrambled forward. The tunnel opened up into a larger space. the boiler room. There was a grate high up on the wall. Moonlight was streaming through it. Marcus, the grate. Marcus jumped up, grabbing the iron bars. He shook them. It's loose. The mortar is old. He kicked at the wall, adrenaline giving him the strength of 10 men. Bang! Bang! The grate gave way, clattering out onto the grass outside. Emily, boost Thomas! We lifted the lanky, trembling man up. He scrambled out into the night air. Emily followed. Then Marcus. He reached his hand down for me. Mama, take my hand! I reached up, coughing violently. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron, and hauled me up. I scraped my knees against the brick, gasping as I tumbled out onto the wet grass of the Vanderwall lawn. We lay there for a second, gulping down the sweet, cool night air. The ground beneath us was vibrating. We could hear the roar of the fire below us, muffled by the earth. We made it, Emily sobbed, holding her brother, who was staring up at the moon with wide, unblinking eyes. It was likely the first time he had seen the sky in 20 years. Not yet, I wheezed, sitting up and wiping soot from my face. Where is she? We looked toward the main house. Smoke was beginning to pour out of the basement windows. The fire had spread from the secret room into the main cellar. The alcohol in the wine bottles would be exploding any second. The whole foundation was a bomb waiting to go off. There, Marcus pointed. Down the driveway, the silver Mercedes was revving its engine. Cynthia was trying to flee. But she wasn't alone. Blocking the driveway, bathed in flashing blue and red lights, was a wall of police cruisers. They had arrived. We watched as the Mercedes screeched to a halt. Cynthia threw the car into reverse, but a SWAT van pulled up behind her, blocking the retreat. She was trapped. We stood up, a ragtag group of survivors covered in soot, sweat, and blood. Come on, I said, my voice raspy but hard. I want to look her in the eye when they put the cuffs on. We walked toward the driveway, Thomas clinging to Emily's arm. The police were shouting orders. Step out of the vehicle, hands where we can see them. The door of the Mercedes opened slowly. Cynthia stepped out. She still looked impeccable from a distance, but up close, I knew she smelled like gasoline and desperation. She raised her hands, but she wasn't looking at the police. She was looking past them. She saw us emerging from the darkness of the lawn, the ghosts she tried to burn. Her eyes locked onto Thomas. And for the first time, her mask didn't just crack, it shattered. Her mouth fell open, the color drained from her face. I walked right up to the police line. The officer tried to stop me, but I flashed him a look that said, "Try me," and he stepped back. I stood 10 feet from her. You missed, I said. Cynthia stared at me, trembling. How? You can't burn the truth, Cynthia, I said, and you can't kill a family that fights for each other. I stepped aside and gently pulled Thomas forward. Officer, I called out to the police captain who was approaching with handcuffs. I'd like to introduce you to Thomas Vanderwall, the rightful owner of this estate, and the boy this woman murdered 20 years ago. Cynthia let out a scream of pure, impotent rage as the officer spun her around and slammed her against the hood of her car. You ruined everything, she shrieked, thrashing as the cuffs clicked shut. You common, dirty little cook! You ruined my life! I watched them shove her into the back of the cruiser. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, exhausted peace. I didn't ruin your life, Cynthia, I whispered as the car door slammed shut. I just served you the bill. I turned back to my son and his family. The house behind us was starting to belch flames from the lower windows, the fire finally consuming the rot at its core. Let it burn, Marcus said, putting his arm around me. Yeah, I said, watching the flames dance. Let it burn. We have a lot of work to do. But as I looked at Thomas, who was reaching out a tentative hand to touch a firefly buzzing near the hedge, I knew the hardest part was over. The monster was in a cage. The boy was free. And me? Well, I had a wedding to plan. And this time, we were doing it my way. The dawn that broke over the smoking ruins of the Vanderwall estate was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It wasn't just the sun. It was the clarity. The gray, suffocating fog of lies that had hung over my son and his fiancée for months had finally lifted, burned away by the very fire Cynthia had lit to destroy us. Fire trucks were still spraying water onto the blackened skeleton of the mansion, but the real cleansing had already happened. We spent the next 12 hours in a whirlwind of police precincts and hospital waiting rooms. The live stream Marcus had rigged from the security camera had done its job a little too well. By the time we walked out of the police station, exhausted and smelling of smoke, there were news vans parked 3 deep on the curb. The Lioness of Chicago, they were calling me. Twitter was ablaze with screenshots of me holding that black binder, looking like a vengeance demon in a ruined red dress. But I didn't care about the cameras. My focus was entirely on the young man sitting in the back seat of my rental car, staring out the window at the passing city with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Thomas, the ghost boy. The doctor said he was malnourished and suffering from severe muscle atrophy from years of confined movement, but physically he was healthy. Mentally, that was a different journey. He had the vocabulary of a preschooler and the social understanding of a hermit crab. But when I handed him a warm biscuit from a drive-thru on the way home, his first taste of food that wasn't a microwave meal in 2 decades, he looked at me and smiled. It was a crooked, hesitant thing, but it was real. Good, he whispered, crumbs tumbling onto his shirt. Yes, baby, I said, blinking back tears. It is good, and it's only going to get better. The next few months were a masterclass in reconstruction. With Cynthia denied bail and facing a list of charges long enough to wrap around the Sears Tower, attempted murder, kidnapping, fraud, embezzlement, arson, the Vanderwall empire collapsed overnight. The black book I had saved became the holy grail for the district attorney. It turned out Cynthia hadn't just bribed a few officials. She was the hub of a corruption ring that tainted half the city's zoning board. Heads rolled. Politicians resigned, and through it all, Emily stood tall. With the evidence of the coercion and the testimony of the foundation's terrified staff, Emily was fully exonerated. She wasn't a conspirator, she was a survivor. She took custody of Thomas immediately, using what remained of the legitimate trust, which, ironically, was substantial once the lawyers stripped away Cynthia's fraudulent debts, to buy a quiet house with a big garden in the suburbs. But the real work happened in my kitchen. Every Sunday, Emily, Marcus, and Thomas came over for dinner. At first, Thomas would hide under the table when the doorbell rang. He was terrified of loud noises and bright lights, so I adapted. We ate by candlelight. We spoke in soft voices. I cooked comfort food, mashed potatoes, pot roast, mac and cheese, dishes that didn't challenge him but hugged him from the inside out. Slowly, the boy emerged from the shell. He started sitting at the table. He started using a fork. One evening, 3 months after the fire, he walked into the kitchen while I was frosting a cake. He watched me for a long time, his blue eyes tracking the spatula. Help, he asked. I handed him a spoon. Here, you smooth the edges. Gentle, like petting a cat. He had a natural touch. His hands, though shaky, were precise. He found a rhythm in the repetition of baking that seemed to soothe the chaos in his mind. We found out later that he had an eidetic memory for patterns. He couldn't read a book, but he could look at a complex wedding cake design and replicate the piping perfectly after seeing it once. He wasn't broken, he was just different. And for the first time in his life, he had a place where different was welcome. Then there was the matter of the wedding. We had scrapped the Vanderwall plans entirely. No country club, no imported swans, no pretension. Marcus and Emily wanted something real. They wanted it to be a celebration of survival. We want you to cater it, Mama, Marcus said one night. But not just cater it. We want you to plan it. All of it. Do it your way. I looked at them. My son, strong and protective. Emily, who had cut her hair short and looked lighter, freer. And Thomas, who was happily kneading dough in the corner. My way? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You know my way involves a lot of butter and very little nonsense. Exactly, Emily beamed. So, 6 months after the night of the fire, we threw the wedding of the century. But it wasn't in a ballroom. We held it in the community botanical gardens, a place that was lush, green, and alive. I closed Regina's table for a week to prep. My staff worked overtime, not because I asked them to, but because they wanted to be part of it. I wore gold. Not a mother of the groom beige, but a shimmering, metallic gold gown that said I was here, I was proud, and I wasn't hiding in the background. The ceremony was simple. When the officiant asked who gave the bride away, Thomas stood up. He was wearing a suit that finally fit his lanky frame. He looked terrified, staring at the crowd of 200 people. I caught his eye from the front row and gave him a nod. You can do this. He took a deep breath, looked at his sister and said, loud and clear, me, her brother. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even the tough as nails bartenders I hired were wiping their faces. But the reception? That was where I shined. It was a feast. Fried chicken piled high on silver platters, collard greens seasoned with smoked turkey, cornbread with honey butter, lobster mac and cheese, and a carving station with prime rib that melted on your tongue. It was soul food served on fine china. It was the perfect marriage of my world and theirs, unapologetic luxury with a heartbeat. During the speeches, Emily took the microphone. She looked out at the crowd, her hand resting on Marcus's shoulder. "We almost didn't make it here," she said, her voice steady. "We were almost burned down by secrets, but we were saved by someone who taught us that the truth is fireproof." She raised her glass to me. "To Regina, the woman who broke the lock." The applause was thunderous. I stood up, waved, and smiled. I felt a profound sense of completion. My son was happy, his wife was safe, her brother was healing, the dragon was slain. But as I sat back down, sipping my iced tea, I felt a vibration in my purse. I ignored it. It was a wedding, after all. Then it buzzed again, and again. I sighed, pulling out my phone. It was an unknown number. I was about to decline it, but something, maybe that old instinct that told me when the oven was running hot, made me answer. "This is Regina," I said, my voice cutting through the music. "Miss King?" A voice on the other end spoke. It was deep, clipped, and sounded expensive. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I represent the Board of Trustees for the City Reform Commission." "I'm at my son's wedding, Mr. Pendleton," I said, watching Marcus spin Emily on the dance floor. "Unless you need a catering quote for a funeral, this isn't a good time." "It's not about catering," he said quickly. "It's about cleaning. We saw what you did with the Vanderwall case. The live stream, the black book. You have a talent for unearthing things that powerful people want hidden." I narrowed my eyes. "I'm a baker, sir. I need dough. I don't need conspiracies." "We have a situation," he pressed on, lowering his voice. "There is a misappropriation of funds in the housing authority. Millions meant for the homeless are vanishing. We have suspicions, but we can't get close. The auditors are scared. The police are hesitant. We need someone who isn't part of the system. Someone who can walk into a room, serve coffee, and see everything." I looked around the party. It was perfect. It was happy. It was safe. I could retire now. My business was booming. The Lioness fame had booked me out until 2027. I could buy a condo in Florida. I could spend my days gardening and waiting for grandkids. I looked at Thomas, who was laughing at something one of the bridesmaids said. He was alive because I didn't mind my own business. "Miss King?" the man asked. "Are you there?" I looked at my reflection in the back of a silver spoon on the table. The gold dress, the sharp eyes. The woman who had stared down a murderer in a burning basement and didn't blink. Retirement? Please. I was 55, not dead. "The housing authority, you say?" I asked, reaching into my purse and pulling out my lipstick. I applied a fresh coat of Warrior Red right there at the table. "Yes. It's dangerous work, Miss King. You'd have to go undercover, maybe as a vendor for their upcoming gala." I snapped my compact shut with a satisfying click. A slow smile spread across my face. "Mr. Pendleton," I said, watching my son kiss his bride. "Dangerous is just a setting on the oven. Send me the files. I'll look at them on Monday." "Really? You'll help?" "Help?" I laughed softly. "Honey, I don't just help. I serve. And it sounds like the housing authority is overdue for a health inspection." I hung up the phone and stood up. The band was playing a funky bass line. The cake, a masterpiece Thomas and I had decorated together, was waiting to be cut. I smoothed down my gold dress and walked toward the dance floor. The adventure wasn't over. The story wasn't done. As long as there were bullies building castles on shifting sand, there would be work for a woman with a sharp eye and a heavy skillet. Marcus saw me coming and held out his hand. "Dance with me, Mama?" "Always, baby," I said, taking his hand. "But don't get too comfortable. I've got a busy week ahead." We spun into the music, the lights of the garden blurring around us like stars. The night was young, the air was sweet, and I was ready for whatever course came next.